You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
Mission Log Prodigy, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. Episode 25, Observer's Paradox.
Welcome into another episode of Mission Log Prodigy, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. I am Marina Kravchuk.
And I am Charlene Schmidt. Just like our flagship Mission Log podcast, each week here on Mission Log Prodigy, we discuss each and every episode of this animated series, discover what makes each of them special, and we see if there's any morals, meanings, or messages that we've learned.
This week, we are in an observer's paradox. Please remember that Mission Log Prodigy is an in-depth review podcast, so if you haven't seen the episode yet, you may want to put us on pause, watch the episode, and then come back to hear us talk all about it.
That's right. Mission Log Prodigy is produced for YouTube and as a regular podcast. So please be sure to engage that like and the share button, subscribe to us here on the Roddenberry Entertainment YouTube channel. And if you're listening to us via audio, make sure you're subscribed with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you get your favorite podcasts, just like this one. And you can also follow us, Mission Log Prodigy, that is, on Twitter at ML_Prodigy, and that way you keep up with all of our latest news and updates.
Before we jump into the recap, let's remind everybody why our podcast is unique. We want to hear from the cadets, the younger Prodigy fans out there who would like to share their thoughts on the show. We loved hearing your thoughts on Temporal Mechanics 101 and hope you will join us again because we're putting out call for submissions for next week's episode, Imposter Syndrome. How do you do that? Here's a quick refresher. Please send us a 1 to 2 minute voice message at missionlog-prodigy@roddenberry.com and tell us the following. What is your first name and age? Did you like the episode? What was your favorite part? And what did you learn? The deadline for Imposter Syndrome is Saturday, August 3rd. So please get your comments in before they can be featured at the end of the next show.
All right. And so how about we do what we do here? We're going to kick things off for this show by answering the very questions we're asking of our cadets. So, Marina, did you like the episode?
Totally. We get another entry that hits many different notes emotionally. I mean, we go from the very beginning where we had the hilarity of the debriefing and trying to learn and understand Murphy's language to complete despair of the wormhole collapse order. So it's up and down.
It really is. We're hitting a lot of the notes. That's really well said. I did like this episode, most of it. Like, I was genuinely shocked. And that when Janeway gives the order to collapse the wormhole, I was really, truly sad about that. And I was sad for her. So this show knows how to push my buttons and get me to those emotionally wrenching moments. But that said, there's tons of great laugh out loud moments. And we do end on a high note, thanks to the EMH, who reminds Janeway and therefore us that not all hope is lost. So keep our head up. So, next question is, what is your favorite part?
I had several, yet again. The last time I had several favorite parts, this time again. I love the way we have the debriefing goes for different characters. I mean, they're all interviewed separately, and you get this complete sort of nonchalance on Dahl's part, somewhat belligerent Jane Com to very apologetic Zero to, Majel is like, they're impossible to deal with. They're just illogical and unreasonable. Meanwhile, Gwyn is like, you know something? Mysterious entity saved my life. So here we are. And then, of course, Murf doing a lot of interpretive gesticulations. So it's like,
a lot of pantomiming going on.
It's hilarious. I love the fact that our little group is back together and we get yet another moment where we can see just how incredibly, amazingly clever Rock is. I mean, she's been trying to kind of like stay away from do not get into trouble. But when she's needed, she's the one who's going to find a solution. And it's always incredibly inspiring to see her work, science the science. And of course, the last moment, which you had mentioned, the fact that Janeway is in the situation as an admiral, she can only let her personal feelings affect her decisions that far. She has to think of a bigger picture. So yeah, the fact that she has to give the order to collapse the wormhole is just totally, completely sad.
It is. I mean, this could potentially mean she loses Chakotay forever. That is a big deal for her personally, but in the grand scheme of Starfleet, she's an officer. She has to follow the orders she's given. And here we are.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Oh, it is so nice that Rock gets her chance to shine. I'm sure we're going to be discussing that a whole lot more. She's just been trying so hard this whole time, put her head down, study hard. She's going to get into the academy, darn it, and nobody else can derail her until until this week, where at least she can help them do this right, if nothing else. I can't help but appreciate that. And so I guess my favorite part in this episode is everything in Cetacean Ops. I mean, for something that was just referenced long, long ago in Next Generation as a thing that exists on a starship, Cetacean Ops, to seeing it first in Lower Decks, but then now seeing it here just warms my Star Trek fan heart so much. And so I love everything with Rock and Murf and Jillian, especially with Rock figuring out that Murf might be better stood underwater. Again, more Star Trek 4 flashbacks. They're really pulling from a lot of stuff, especially with cetaceans from that movie. But then also the hug that Murf and Rock have before he goes off, because he's a little scared, and that's so sweet that she goes down with him. And then Murf turning into a mermaid, I guess.
Mermaid.
The Murf-maid. That was so much fun. Who knew? It was so good. But then also the Bridges crew of their show support for Janeway was a very touching moment. And so I have to tack that on at the end because it warmed my black little heart. So many good moments in this episode. Wow.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
Well, how about lessons? What did you learn?
Well, we mentioned in the previous episode that our crew is in the process of learning the value of being loyal to each other, solving the problems together. And I guess the additional twist to it is the fact of that each one of them brings something else, the diversity of knowledge, the diversity of backgrounds. So you have someone, you involve someone who can provide the best input. And in this case, the best xenobiologist that they have is Rock. Rock is the one who figures out how to understand Murf. So that's a lovely, lovely thing to illustrate. And another one, which I think is a very big one, is that wonderful, beautiful statement that the doctor provides. Hope is never a foolish thing. Hope is an engine for not giving up.
Right?
That's the thread that runs through the entire season. It's the engine for aspiring to do better, to be better. You can certainly say that that's like one of the main tenets, actually, of Star Trek as a franchise. Star Trek is hope. So I thought that was an absolutely beautiful thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, nicely said.
Thank you.
I was a little more simplistic in my lessons, but there are a lot of lessons. So I went for the kind of goofier ones to start off, and then we'll get into the serious stuff later. But number one, this is very important. Coffee makes everything better, even debriefings. I'm glad Janeway is passing this along so that Dal really comes into his own as a potential captain. He will need coffee for that. Number two, hamburgers. Beating Nutrigroup any day. For sure. It's nice to see that they've expanded their palates a little bit and they're trying more foods. And then number three, as long as this crew sticks together, they can work their way through anything. That was nicely on display here.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your answers. And now it's time for this episode's recap.
All right, here we go. This episode was written by Jennifer Miro and directed by Rulin Lee and Andrew L. Schmidt. Here's the story. Voyager is dealing with the fallout from their failed mission to rescue Chakotay, and an investigation is underway to understand what happened. Dal, Majel, Rocktalk, Gwen, Jankum, and Zero all provide their take on what happened in debriefings, and even Murf provides helpful input with a gurgly pantomime of what he experienced. The kids are worried that Janeway and the senior staff don't believe them. As Dr. Newham and the EMH air their concerns about how much trouble the kids have caused, Janeway reminds them and Tysis that this was all an accident, and as a crew, they must all share the blame. They must also return the protostar to Tars Lamora and find out more about this mysterious entity that knew about their mission. Whatever is going on is far from over. In the meantime, Janeway assigns the EMH to supervise their wayward crew so they won't land into more trouble. The kids commiserate over their newfound circumstances over lunch. None of what they have been through has gone as planned, but Dal is still optimistic that they can fix everything if they find Chakotay and send the protostar back into the past. Rock isn't as optimistic, but she's interrupted by a squealing Murf who demands everybody's attention to a circular pattern he's made out of various objects nearby. Gwen has seen this spiral before, when the mysterious voice told her that they had to stick together. It's the ghost, Jankum proclaims, and Rock Talk realizes that perhaps the mysterious entity was also talking to Murf. He could have all the answers, but unfortunately, no one understands Murphy's. The kids must figure out a way to understand what he's saying. Unfortunately, that will not be easy with the EMH popping in on them. The EMH sees their anxiousness and interprets it as anxiety over their failed mission. As he escorts them all back to their quarters, he offers his very own 10-step anxiety program for Academy hopefuls, or AH for short. But right now, it might as well be AH! Because every time one of the kids tries to leave their quarters, the EMH is there with more helpful suggestions. Next order of business? Ditch the doc. Zero thinks of the perfect distraction. He appeals to the EMH's ego and asks about his latest holonovel titled Love in the Time of Holograms. The diversion works, and Operation What the Heck is Murf Saying is afoot. Everyone gets together, sans Rock Talk, who is not interested in whatever illegal stuff they're doing. Gwen starts work on deciphering the difference between oops and oots, but it's a tedious process. Jankum makes some tweaks to the universal translator in a communicator and attaches it to Murf, but what comes out is a random flurry of words as the translator malfunctions. In Cetacean Ops, Rock hears the commotion as the kids chase after Murf as he runs amok in the corridor. No, she will not get involved and returns to work cleaning the streaks off the whale tank. Sensing Rock's distress, the whale, Jillian, asks if she would like to talk about it, but it's a long story. Cut to Gwen and Dal, who are deciphering the significance of the spiral. They're cross-referencing through Starfleet's entire database, but too many variables are leading to dead ends. Gwen's head is spinning, and Dal checks in with her. She's been through a lot. She assures him that she's okay, and if she can get even one thing right in this mess, she's determined to try. They agree that, going forward, they don't do anything alone. Just then, the computer pings with a hit in the database. The spiral has the same pattern as a petroglyph used by descendants of the rubber tree people. And who might be such a descendant? Captain Chakotay. Cut to the shuttle bay, where Janeway, Tysis, and Newham are investigating the miraculous repairs to the Infinity. It seems unlikely the kids could have performed the advanced calculations that rerouted the ship's power systems, so what was the mysterious entity? And is the mysterious entity possibly Chakotay? Just as Janeway pieces these things together, she receives a message from Admiral Jellicoe. Naturally, he has bad news. Starfleet cannot risk another protostar disaster and wants the wormhole closed. The mission is over, and with it, all hope of rescuing Chakotay. Back in Gwen's quarters, the kids also believe that Chakotay is the mysterious entity communicating with them. However, they don't understand the full connection to what Murf is saying. They need assistance from one person who can help, Rock. She initially refuses, citing that she already tried translating Murf for months with no success, and she certainly doesn't want to get into any more trouble. Is she the only one who still cares about getting into the academy? No, Dal retorts. They need her help because they do care, because their only hope of fixing the timeline and Gwen is by finding Chakotay and the protostar. Rock agrees to help. She might not like what they're doing when it comes to breaking regs, but she can at least help them do the job right. It probably isn't a coincidence that Rock remembers that Murf's species evolved from sea life with an aquarium just behind her. Perhaps Murf is meant to be understood in water, and better understood by another seafaring creature. Good thing Jillian is right there and happy to assist. Murf is a little scared to enter the water and meet Jillian. Rock will accompany him so he's not alone, and after they dive in, they exchange a hug. When he's ready, Murf swims off and turns into a Murf maid? Murf swims gleefully in the tank, embracing the change, and then begins talking to Jillian. Indeed, Jillian can understand him. She translates the message, "Find me," along with a series of numbers that aren't coordinates or any other easily recognized pattern. So, what are they? On the bridge, Tysis has prepped a quantum torpedo to be detonated by a tachyon pulse to collapse the wormhole. Dr. Newham wants Janeway to know that none of the bridge crew wanted the mission to end like this, and they all stand in a show of support. Janeway takes a moment in her ready room, breathing a heavy sigh. One of the many trinkets she keeps there catches her eye, and she remembers the day Chakotay gave it to her. Think of it like a beacon to guide me home, he said. It's a stone with an interesting spiral pattern on it, and Janeway holds it close as she gives the order to fire. The EMH joins Janeway as they watch the wormhole collapse. She asks him if she's a fool to still hope he's out there, somewhere, alive and safe. He replies that hope is never foolish, and that whatever a door closes, a window opens. Back in Cetacean Ops, Gwen exchanges a moment of gratitude with Murf. While doing so, Gwen realizes that if she inputs the string of numbers into her time stabilizer, that might lead to finding Chakotay. It's a risky proposition, though. The time stabilizer is the only thing keeping Gwen in this timeline, but she feels it's the right thing to do. She promises that she will switch it back if anything feels off, and shortly after inputting the number combination, disappears. She comes to in space? She sees a spiral, and then everything in the cosmos whooshes by before everything around her stops again, and she can hear her friends calling her name. She hears another voice that says, "Find me before they do." She taps her stabilizer, screaming as she comes back to reality. It was a draining experience, but she knows where to find Chakotay because the spiral is actually a map. And that is where we will pick up next week in Imposter Syndrome.
Oh, this is heavy.
Oh my goodness. Here we go. Yeah, I don't know about you, but I always get just so excited for the next episode right about at this point of our show. Like, I just want to keep going.
Yeah.
But there's so much to unpack in this episode. So how about we start going through a little bit of our observations?
Yeah.
So many little things, maybe not as many as last week, but definitely things here. First of which, I have to reinforce the whole thing of Janeway instilling a love of coffee in Dal. Apparently, he just needs sugar in his. That's fine.
Yeah. Well,
This is
you know
good.
what? That scene where we see Janeway front and center pouring something into an obvious coffee mug. And my first thought, I kid you not, I was thinking she's making her coffee more coffee. But apparently, I mean, I thought it was like, is it an espresso shot being poured into black coffee? I wouldn't put it past Janeway.
Not
Apparently,
at all.
she was pouring something, probably something sweeter, so that Dal can
Dal.
actually drink it. But I was like, this is amazing. She's making coffee more coffee.
Yeah, honestly, I think maybe that's the difference between Admiral Janeway and Captain Janeway is after she finally gave up tea, because that was not a great idea, she just decided, I am not just going to drink coffee. I am going to drink more coffee with my coffee. And now does espresso shots in her black coffee. For sure. Like that's in my head as perfectly canon, perfectly plausible.
Well, we saw that. We saw that part as part of a teaser, right? So it's like, yeah, at that point, it was like, yes, she's doing something to her coffee. I mean, now that we know that it was actually addressed to Doll, if you will, so it's a completely different context. But yeah, that was fun.
It was great. That was a great moment. And then so was when Doc makes the dig at the USS Cerritos. And so, first time fans, if you've not seen Lower Decks, go check out that show sometime. If you have seen the show, you know that this dig is warranted. So dysfunctional. And I say this with nothing but with love. I love Lower Decks, but I have a question about this. Has the EMH actually seen the Cerritos crew in action? And if so, when did that happen or when will it happen? Like, is this like a subtle hint that we might see him in what is it? As we're recording this, the 5th season is yet to be released of Lower Decks. Will we see this happen?
But wouldn't that be cool? Well, I
Yeah.
am all for crossovers. I really enjoy them the way that they can be done. I mean, it's just beautiful. Speaking of the Doctor, again, he is part of the comic relief somewhat, but he does some of the funniest quips so far. When we're in the middle of debrief and we have this, as I already described, this range of emotion from mistakes were made to listen, coffee so much better with sugar and everything in between. And he just goes, I have a headache. And technically, I don't have a head. I literally laughed out loud at that moment. It's just so much fun.
It's such a good line. And perfectly delivered. So much fun. I love the fact that the kids have basically discovered teenage food, which is burgers, sandwiches. They do have sides of vegetables, though. I noticed they're eating a lot better than the Nutrigoop days, that's for sure. I appreciate that. Plus, that scene is so much fun looking for Murf as he's taking random objects throughout the scene. Like I
Yeah,
had to do that a couple times just to observe
and
and
the
have
thing is
fun
that
with it.
I have to say that when he just started doing it, I thought it was like, well, that's just Murph being Murph. You know
Yes,
how he
exactly.
is always just a little bit of,
He's
probably
crazy.
trouble. Probably trouble. And then you realize that, oh no, he's smart enough he wants to illustrate a point, literally. So
Yes.
yeah, that was a fun one.
Yeah, he was actually doing something, not just being his
Hmm.
crazy self. All right. So let's see. Another thing that I've got is I've got a musical
Yeah.
cue.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes, yes, sometimes the soundtrack is so good and I get so immersed in the episode that I have a hard time keying into these sort of things. But I did notice something really cool that Nami did in this episode, and that is in the scene where Janeway, Tysus, the EMH, and Dr. Noom are in discussion about like
Hmm.
after the debriefings. There's a cue about 5 minutes in that's really reminiscent of a musical pattern in Star Trek The Motion Picture. I
Oh,
did catch
interesting.
that one.
Yeah, I did not catch that. I have to go back now and listen. That's interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
check that out.
absolutely. I have to give a huge shout out to our favorite Aaron Waltke, and also to unless some people perhaps don't know that that person is out there, York Hillebrand, who's basically our
Yes.
modern day Richard Arnold, is a person who has incredible eye for all sorts of minutia and trivia in pretty much all of Star Trek. They both of them posting replies and details and explaining things that you see on screen in Prodigy, and just generally like to the writing staff in general for Prodigy for being so specific, because so many different things that, yeah, again, it's not crucial to knowing what's going on screen. Folks who have seen Voyage, you have seen Next Generation, other productions, the little things that are part of world building. They're like, I recognize this. I know where this came from. This explains it better. And other things that kind of make everything so multi-layered and complex and fascinating. So in this case, for example, we have a brief shot of Chakotay's record, the entry in the database, and you see the numbers. It's like alpha something something. It's the serial number that he actually says on screen in one of the episodes of Voyager in the Flash. It's like somebody knew that that's going to pop up. Somebody needs to put that in. It's not just random.
These
So
folks
it's
know their stuff.
they
Yeah,
know. Oh yeah, they absolutely know their stuff. So it's a huge shout out. Thank you. I mean, we're gonna have further things that as we're discussing our observations and lessons learned, and a lot of the little details like this are thanks to Prodigy staff. They're amazing.
absolutely.
And again, York Hillebrand, because my goodness, to notice a lot of these things, you have to have a special talent. He's incredible.
Yeah. Oh, you have to have eagle-eyed vision to catch all these little things. And his account is incredible at catching every single one of them. And then also shout out to Aaron for being just such a great presence online and answering questions. One of which
Hmm.
was something that I had when this season first came out. And it was, well, surely this whale, Jillian, has to be a descendant of George and Gracie from Star Trek 4. Yes.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
he actually, there's like a little thread out there, you can find it, where he explains that, yeah, she basically was kind of a legacy admission to Starfleet because of her heritage, because George and Gracie were her parents and they were brought into the future by
Grandparents.
Kirk or grandparents. Yeah. And she is the descendant of George and Gracie for sure. That is confirmed.
Yeah.
So very cool. Love that.
And of course, she's voiced by Bonnie Gordon, who's also the voice of the computer and several other
Yes.
characters. So it makes Jillian awesome all the way around.
Yeah. And it was Bonnie's idea to come up with a
Mhm.
sing-songy way that Jillian talks,
Yeah,
like
it's
whale
just a whale
song.
song, exactly. Yeah.
Yes. Genius. Love it, love it, love it, love it. Well, okay. I want to know your opinion on something.
Um,
When Jellicoe calls
yeah.
Janeway by her first name, how did you feel about that? Because it seems
Do
wrong
you
to
know?
me.
Yeah, but at the same time, if you remember, whenever we see flag officers, so admirals, vice admirals, etc., whenever they're communicating between themselves, they're practically all, well, not practically always, that's too much, but frequently they actually go for first names. I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind, Nemesis, when Janeway contacting Captain Picard to tell him that his mission is to go to Romulus. He's Jean-Luc, like yeah, they're probably
That's true.
friendly. I mean, come on, you are talking about Janeway and Picard, but nevertheless, there is that sort of level of informality when you get to captains and beyond, where it seems so. Yeah, for me it was kind of like yeah,
Yeah.
that's okay. Yeah, I can totally see Jellicoe being um sort of like on the shorter communication. I don't know. So yeah, for me it seemed all right. I mean, I
Yeah.
do prefer when Chakotay, of course, calls her Catherine. It sounds better, but yeah,
Well,
you know what
and
I mean.
maybe that is just the rule in my head where he's allowed to do that. Chakotay is allowed to do that. Admiral
Yeah.
Jellicoe, are you that close to Janeway to say that? But I
No,
think he
I
was
think
doing it for emphasis
I think
too.
it's
And
just that sort of like exactly just the communication. Once you go beyond a certain level of rank, things change. Like you wouldn't have a captain talking to lieutenant, or rather, I should say, lieutenants talking the same way to captains and everything. But if you've seen captains and admirals, and certainly between different admiral levels, it's probably more acceptable to go by name. Yeah. That's another thing to confirm probably with Aaron if that's what they kind of figured. But we do have precedents for that in other productions, so I think it's fine.
we do. It just really
Yeah.
caught me off guard as him doing that to her.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Especially
Maybe
that,
that's just me.
yeah. Plus, it's the fact that it's Jellicoe, and let's face it, this is not one. I mean, he's not an
It's not
outright
our
admiral.
favorite.
He's not a admiral, but he kind of carries with him the baggage the way he was in the Next Generation, where, he's slightly somewhat weary of where he's coming from.
Yeah,
Um,
he's not in the in group. Let's put it
no.
that way.
Now, one observation I had that I find fascinating because I've
Mhm.
noticed this happening as the series progresses, and the fact that we get so much inclusion of different details and items from Voyager literary apocrypha. So it's the things that pop up that are not, as the much hated term, canon, meaning what we see on the screen. It's the items that have been created, invented, described in the novels, in the books, in novelizations. And we have quite a lot. So we
Yeah, let's
see
go through this list.
very brief moment. We see a shot of Janeway's Starfleet diploma, and it says Catherine M. Janeway. Now, I do have a question. Like, I have a diploma. My full name is spelled out, so I don't know why there is an initial. But the initial it actually comes from a novelization for Caretaker. So
Yes.
that's where it's Catherine M. And
For
what's
Margaret.
more, it kind of developed a little bit further that it's Margaret in the autobiography written by Dr. McCormack. Very
That's
recent
right.
book from a couple of books, from a couple of years ago. Sorry. So it's a curious thing that we have something sort of coming in out of so-called memory beta from the literary Star Trek world.
And now
Um,
officially canon because
I
it's on
know.
screen.
And another one that's sort of similar in the same vein, and that came from Aaron Waltke actually on Twitter. And one of the trinkets that you see on the shelf in Janeway's radio room is this beautiful open mirror, hand mirror.
Yes.
That is actually from a short story called the Sabo Short. That was I'm trying to think how many years ago now. It was one of the
Many.
Voyager anniversaries. It's a short story that was written.
2005.
Oh, there you go. It was written by Kirsten Beyer, the amazing Kirsten Beyer that's responsible for a lot of things in Discovery and Picard. And she's also the one who carried the Voyager novels for a very, very long time. So
Right.
it pops up
Prior.
in one of the first short stories that were published that was written by her. And I am amazed that, again, such an obscure little thing that adds a beautiful little twist to the scene where you see all these objects that are one way or another connected to Chakotay. So
Yes.
I find it lovely. And another big thing, and I kind of applaud this because for the folks who read fan fiction, they would think that, well, of course, this came from Voyager. We know this. It's never been shown on screen. It also comes from a novel. We now have the canon name for Chakotay's homeworld. Now, if you
Yes.
recall, the whole idea of the where Chakotay is coming from, being the former Maquis, there was a planet Dorvan in the Next Generation, and a lot of times it was like, well, he's obviously coming from there, seeing the similarity of the background to the characters and everything. But no, it's actually there's a small planet called Trebus that's also in demilitarized zone with Cardassians, and now it's only mentioned in the novel, and a whole lot of fan fiction, as I
Until
already said.
now.
until now. Now it's confirmed. Now we see it on the screen in his record where he comes and his father's name is right there on the screen and his mother's, which also comes from a novel.
Yeah.
So it's I whoever came up with this, there must have been a whole lot of discussions of pulling in all this information that's already out there. Like, why not to include it? So I can only applaud this. Is you made the world
Absolutely.
a Star Trek creature by including all these extra details.
Yeah. I mean, it's just such a great testament to what
Mhm.
fans, the folks who are putting Prodigy together are. Collectively, they know all the same things that we know. They have read the books just like
Yeah,
we have.
but
They
it's
pay
on the
attention to these
level.
details. They
It's on the
care.
level of encyclopedic knowledge because this is not something, just because I read a whole lot of fan fiction, I can probably come up with a lot of these things on top of my head. As a general fan who's, yeah, maybe watched half of Voyager, he's aware of where who the characters are and what they are to each other. Something like this must come across as, how on earth do you even remember something like this? But
Well, they
these
are
people
wicked
did.
smart,
Yeah,
all of them.
yeah, yeah.
For sure. Yeah, there were a
So,
couple more trinkets in Janeway's quarters I'd love
oh,
to
those
run
were
down. And
fun. That
oh,
was a
they
great
are,
scene.
and they're
Yeah.
all just in a line. I love the screenshots of this part of the episode because you see things like the spider barrette that Janeway wore in her hair during the episode Bride of Chaotica. And if you've not seen that episode of Voyager, it's a lot of fun. So
It's a
check that
must.
out sometime.
Yeah.
It's a holodeck episode and it's crazy good. There's a Voyager era comm badge, her handheld phaser. There's also a plaque with the city of Bloomington, Indiana on it. That's her birthplace.
Yeah, that's also something confirmed online.
Yes,
It's a curiously recent logo, if you will. So it's only from about, I think it's a 2020, 2021. So it's a
very
little
recent.
from just several years ago. That was created apparently by a person who was also a Star Trek fan himself. So,
Yes,
it's delightful that she kind of has this. I'm curious, like, was that like some kind of award given to her by the city? It's quite possible. Maybe she
maybe.
just keeps it as a reminder where she came from. I don't know.
Yeah, just to remember her home. Sure. Now, are there any others that you want to go through? Because
Well, this,
there's
yeah,
more.
the big one, the stone.
The
So,
stone.
again, for those who are fans of Voyager, the stone actually had a rather delightful name, Chumuzi. It had all sorts of like little circular petroglyphs on it and lines. This was created. The design was created by Rick Sternbach, who also happens to be, well, he designed a lot of things going back well into the 80s. Specifically for Voyager, he's of course the creator of Voyager herself, the ship.
The ship.
So he's the one who designed it, and it's based on a spiral galaxy, specifically Milky Way galaxy. The implication
Wow.
is that the lines may suggest paths of various wormholes, the other spatial phenomena that you might inquire and find in the galaxy. I believe going way back, there were actual discussions like, is one of the lines actually the gamma quadrant wormhole from Deep Space Nine, or is it not? So
Oh.
it was a lovely. It's just a piece of rock with a circular thing on it.
It means so
Um,
much here, though.
but it does. It's like it's a lovely thing that Chakotay obviously gives something that means a lot to him as a gift to her, and it is now in Prodigy indeed proven to be a map. So
Yes.
it wasn't just a random stone with fancy design. It is a
No.
helpful thing because Gwyn is able to actually extrapolate information from this.
Yes. All right. Any other observations that you have?
Well, there were some other things. I find it hilarious that Janeway apparently has multiple Voyagers, like the actual models of the ship. In
Oh,
season one,
yeah.
remember when we have the switch over between Janeway and Dal, he's playing with one of her smaller Voyagers. This Voyager
Yeah.
that has right now on the shelf is much bigger. Somebody said, like, well, maybe it's that. I'm like, no, she must have different size Voyagers. For all we know, she even travels with a miniature Voyager in her bag. Could
Yeah.
be. So I'm all for it. I'm all for it. Who knows? Maybe at that time Eagle Moss is still around and we have, or I should say, Eagle Moss came back and is producing different size models.
Right.
Possible.
Maybe. I'd love to think they're still around.
Did you see there was a very I think you don't see, like, it's like literally blink and you miss it. There's a photo of her, the younger her, the way we see her at the beginning of Voyager with
Yes.
a bond of steel, with her dog, Molly. So at this
Molly.
point, I would assume the dog is probably gone some years.
I
But it's
imagine.
a very, very similar design photo to what we actually see on screen in the beginning of Voyager. And
Yeah.
it's lovely. We reminded over and over that Janeway is a dog person. And it's almost a pity that she actually cannot have a pet with her because
Right? I mean, Archer
lovely.
did on Enterprise. Price. He had
Yeah, but
Porthos.
that predates. That's before the quadrants got
I
so much
know.
bigger for travel.
Too bad she can't
Um,
have a cat,
so
because Data had Spot.
yeah, that's true. So I find it delightful that we have this. I mean, we've seen things in Captain Picard's ready room and yeah, well, Cerritos, most certainly. I mean, there's like a whole display. So it's a thing that captains do. But
Yes,
it's very heartwarming that, well, for obvious reasons, for Janeway, majority of the items are Voyager related because that was,
of course.
the epic journey that very few Starfleet officers of that rank, ever had. She's probably the farthest travel one, I suppose.
Certainly.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So it's a lot. In just that one scene, you get this explosion of
Yeah, and we've been
information.
talking
It's
about
lovely.
it for how many minutes, but that's just how, I don't know, that's how important it is to
Mhm.
us as
Yeah.
longtime fans, but also the love and care that they put into every little frame of the
Mhm.
show.
It's
All right.
incredibly thought out. Just to finish on the sort of funnier note,
Yeah.
um, I love the fact that we have Zero, who is non-corporeal, so we just have this moving mechanical suit, and yet, yeah, that moment when Zero comes back from having had this distracting, I mean, they sacrifice themselves to distract the doctor from what we were trying to do with with Murph. And they come back and you can see just the frustration, exasperation, basically rolling their
Or
eye.
Zero.
I can't believe I went through this for you guys.
They are so
So
tired.
how incredible the animation is. It's like there is no face, there are no eyes, and yet you know precisely just how frustrated and
Yeah.
incredulous he is by what he just had
For real,
to go through.
you know exactly
So
how Zero's feeling.
that's what for very for yeah, for some very brief scenes, we certainly have a lot of observations, actually.
We had a
Um,
lot for this episode. Now, not every
yeah,
episode might, but we had to go through
yeah,
the whole list of Janeway's trinkets for one, and then we had a lot more on top of that. But how about we
yeah,
move now to the
yeah.
discussion?
So yeah, so let's review. Let's see what types of morals, meanings, messages we can also discuss. So what did you find specifically meaningful and memorable in the episode beyond what we already managed to talk
Yeah.
about?
Yeah, well, I found it really interesting that there are some really good morals, meanings, and messages in this episode that aren't necessarily spelled out as this is what you're supposed to learn in this
Hmm.
episode.
Yeah.
So, for instance, right at the very beginning during the debriefing, I would say that there's a great lesson to be had just from seeing how everybody tells the truth. They all have a different take. And no one's exaggerating, though. No one is outright lying to make anybody else make themselves look better or to throw anybody under the proverbial bus. Everybody just shared their perspective as they saw it, and they kept it at that because the truth matters. And that might sound really clear
Yeah.
cut and obvious, but just the fact that that is on display is just nice, because there's a lot of people who will play games like that and try and make themselves look like I didn't do it, I'm not responsible, and they probably point the finger at somebody else. The
Yeah.
kids aren't doing that. That's a
No.
no-no.
No, I mean, Majel, even though she says, like, yes, they're impossible to reason to, they're illogical, but she never says, yeah, it was Dal's fault or we didn't do this. No, it's a statement of this is what happened. This is what I mean, we don't see this kind of things. I mean, I'm sure it's discussed between the cuts, but when they explain what happened. But yeah, it's basically, it is a debrief, not a guilt show. It's like,
Yeah, it's not finger pointing.
it's not finger point, exactly.
Yeah.
I
What's one you
something
got?
that I already mentioned, the fact that Janeway is in the position where she has to make hard choices.
Yeah, for sure.
And because you have to, again, it's going back to that finding the balance between taking risks and at the same time backing away from potentially bad decisions. It's a situation that's bigger than one person. It's a situation that's bigger than her best friend, even than her crew. We are talking about a wormhole, a time paradox, something that may affect not just whatever the region of space around it. It may affect the entire galaxy for all we know. So in this
Right.
case, it's heart-wrenching, but at the same time, yeah, given the information that she has at hand, that's the only decision that she can do to minimize possible damage.
Right. It goes back
That's
into one of the bigger themes of Star Trek in
Mhm.
general, which is the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the
Yeah,
few or the one.
Yeah. So basically, yeah, it always comes down to this. Whether we're talking about the captains or the admirals, well, in this case, the admiral. Usually, it is the captains. It's like, yeah, what's the best possible decision you can come up
Right.
with? Take the
What's the
risk or
greater
not take
good?
the risk. That with information at hand would make the most sense.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of Janeway, she drops a very profound truth just about how Starfleet works when she says everybody shares the blame. In a team environment like a crew, you collectively all have to take responsibility for when things go wrong, but then you also work together to fix it. And that, of course, is on display here. And I love the fact that our kids are the prime display of this. Not just Janeway. It's not just the adults teaching the kids how to do this. The kids themselves are doing incredible
Yeah.
work. They're deciding not to do things alone. They're looking out for one another, which is
Mhm.
wonderful to see. We've got Dal and Gwen just
Yeah.
checking in, like, hey, are you okay? You've been through a lot, and talking things out, which is so important. But then also Rock and Murf. Rock is going to go down into the water with Murf because he's scared.
Yeah.
She's there for him because, again, the bigger picture is more important than any one person, as a part of the whole. They all
Yeah.
have to contribute, they all have to face those fears, and they'll do it together. So
Yeah.
that's pretty cool. I guess one last thing I have is to borrow a phrase from earlier in the season. You'll be called upon when needed. And so in this episode, you mentioned it right at the top.
Mhm.
Rock's brilliant
Yeah.
scientific mind holds up the key to unlocking the secret message given to Murph. And it shows how everybody's respective talents work together. It's like puzzle pieces, putting
Mhm.
them together. Everybody has their own little bit to contribute. And then when you put it together, it makes the bigger picture. And that's how it all
Yeah.
works. Love it. What
To
else we got?
finish up the this is something that's very obvious, and yet how like it stared me in the face. I haven't really come up with this until just before we started recording. The value of communication. Like if you think about the fact that we've known Murph how long now, and he's been part of the academy, and yet up until this moment, no one really figured out how to properly communicate with him.
Yeah. No, not for lack of trying,
I
though.
mean,
I mean, it
it's kudos to
sounds.
him that he manages to actually go through courses yeah, and to train, and obviously he impresses a whole lot of his peers at the academy, and the probably the officers on board, but yet he's there. He's this misunderstood melanoid worm that literally misunderstood. So it's very much Dharmak and Jalad. When you have somebody who's dead set, quite literally, I'm like, I have to make contact, understand. So in this case, yeah, our crew finally, buttons down, like making, doing their best to like we're gonna understand what Murph is saying, and in the end, that actually it's so straightforward. Kudos to Rock. Remember, it's like, yeah, melanoid slime worms are from water, so maybe there's a frequency that makes him unintelligible in the air. He has to be in the water. It's
Yeah.
brilliant.
Look, yeah, just
Um,
one little change of venue made a
mhm.
big difference,
Yeah, and
to come to that conclusion.
speaking of water, we have well, Star Trek is primarily humanoid aliens. Yes, we do
Yes.
have quite a few non-humanoid ones, but not a lot of them are featured constantly. Yeah, we do have Murph that kind of became humanoid-like, but he started
Mhm.
out as this slimy slimy bulb. I love the fact that Prodigy, by its nature, obviously allows to show more non-humanoid intelligent species just doing their thing as part of, well, in this case we're talking about part of the Federation, but so it's the diversity of life forms coexisting, working together, doing stuff together. So it's already represented in the crew, obviously we know that,
Sure.
but I love the matter of factness with which we have a whale just there. Yeah, everybody's talking.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jillian, just another person on board. We already have this to a degree with the beluga whales on in the lower decks. We
Sure.
kind of already touched upon that. Like, yeah, you have cetacean ops. That's what you have. Belugas wearing little. You wouldn't do that
Little
for, I suppose, for
uniforms.
a full size whale because that's a whole lot
Well,
for
that's a
uniform.
lot of fabric. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, Voyager 8 just happens to have a whale navigation officer, and as you do, so
This is
even
a
though
part of starships. Yes.
Exactly, exactly. I do try to kind of picture, like, in cases of emergency, if you do have to, everybody goes to jettison off the ship, and what do they do for creatures like that? There's got to be some major.
You know
I have to look
what?
up because, again, the
Yeah,
station ups come from TNG, so maybe it's out there somewhere in, like, in the old manual.
go.
Maybe there is a mention. There's like, yeah, and then
There
there's a little
is.
thing comes out, and the whole aquarium slides out into space
Yeah,
or
there's a
something.
whole thing. There's a whole operation. Aaron Waltke and his team thought of
Mhm.
everything. If you go on his Twitter account,
Yeah,
somebody asked about this, and there is like a way to eject the tank, sort of like
it's
how the
brilliant.
humanoids have their life pods. The tank will eject so Jillian can also escape and stay safe and alive.
But it's I find it tremendous. Like, what a great thing. I mean, we've had a little bit with, like, species that doesn't have necessarily four limbs
Sure.
doing things with, like, Enterprise with Zinzi. We had insectoids, we
Yes.
had amphibians, the whole thing. But in this case, to have right in your face, like, yeah, she's a navigation officer. Can you imagine postings in Starfleet, like, USS such and such is in search of a qualified dolphin or something?
Yeah.
Isn't that fun?
Yeah. Anybody know anybody?
Yeah. Yeah, looking for a dolphin pilot.
Yeah. And yet, this is a real thing. I mean, cetaceans really do have excellent navigational ability, and somebody way back when tapped into this and thought maybe that'll
Yeah.
work in space. And I just love
So,
that modern Star Trek has taken this and run with it.
yeah, I am so pleased that we have a lot of all these little things that were either mentioned or came up randomly on the tangent. Why don't we start wrapping up, as we spent quite a bit of time talking about all the wonderful observation points and lessons.
Absolutely.
What a truly excellent episode. As a sort of a side note, never ceases to amaze me just how truly beautiful the production is. The visuals are extraordinary. I mean, all those the spatial phenomena, the nebulae, all the and we don't really have that many, like, battles. It's the actual space vistas, and not to mention the characters themselves. What a fantastic design. So I'm kind of hoping that, we'll get all sorts of behind the scenes features once we get to DVDs and Blu-rays, or better yet, like a book or two on the subject matter eventually. That would be fantastic to learn the process, because there's just so much thought put into everything. It's delightful.
I love
As
that.
a final thought, I am very curious about Majel. I mean, all we have is her in the beginning saying, "Okay, these guys are so illogical," and then the little bit in the mess hall where she just very quietly rejoins her Nova Squadron peers, and is just seemingly out of the picture. We don't see her for any of the rest of the action for the rest of the episode. So is she out of the picture, or is she kind of gonna come back to the crew? It's a big question. I think it'd be interesting to see what happens there. Finally, the mysterious entity. That whole statement that comes up during Gwen's cosmic vision, "Find me before they do." That certainly put us to damper on things, right? Because we kind of assume that, we assume that this is this benefactor, the entity that fixed the infinity, all those secret messages, and we assume it's all one thing that's helping us. So they help the crew out, but does that mean that they're themselves in trouble? Is it Chakotay, or is it something else? And who is the ominous they?
Right.
Now we have this additional, oh my goodness, is there more stuff coming? What now?
Let's have more chaos.
Yes.
Yes. Love it. Okay. I think for my final thoughts, I really think this is a great example of show don't tell storytelling.
Yeah.
When it comes especially to putting the morals and the meanings and the messages on display, they are not spelled out. They're simply there and they are seen to be absorbed. And I really like this mix of fun moments. We certainly had a good number of them, but it also hits that emotional peak when the wormhole collapses. Man, that's a low point that feels so defeating, and then we've got to lift up just a little bit so we keep on walking into the next episode. I'm very excited next week, and
Yeah.
then we can talk about what happens from there, because this show always knows how to get to me.
Yeah. It's literally
Well, and with that,
every episode that comes to the end, and you sort of kind of left with, okay, what's next? You want to know what's going to happen
exactly.
next.
In a way, it was kind of nice that we were able to binge the whole season just so we didn't have to wait a whole week if we didn't want to. Even though
Yeah.
we're examining week by week, it was nice that first time around, just like, yeah, give me more, and just indulge in it all. But with that, how about for this episode here? Let's reach the end of our show. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on Mission Log Prodigy. And if you enjoyed our show, please make sure that you like and share and subscribe to the Mission Log Prodigy playlist on Roddenberry Entertainment on our YouTube channel. Or you can find us on your podcatcher of choice and catch us in your ear holes. Mission Log Prodigy is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment, production and technical direction by Earl Green. Our website and your opportunity to comment and connect with us is at missionlogpodcast.com. And if you want to support Mission Log directly, you can do so at patreon.com/missionlog.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. Next week, we will take a look at imposter syndrome. Don't forget to watch that episode and send us your thoughts no later than Saturday, August 3rd. You can do that at missionlog-prodigy@roddenberry.com. We can't wait to hear what you have to say about that. But right now, let's hear what you have to say about Observer's Paradox.
Receiving listener communications. Message playback begins.
What is your name?
My name is James.
How old are you?
I'm 9.
Did you like the episode?
I loved it.
What was your favorite part?
When they try to translate Murf with the badge, but it doesn't work and he starts running around going, no, Saturday!
And what did you learn?
To never interfere with the space timeline.
Excellent.
Okay, what's your name and age?
My name is Rook and my age is 9.
Rook, did you like the episode this week?
Yes.
What was your favorite part of the episode?
My favorite part of the episode was when Murf just talked nonsense.
You liked it when Jankum tried to translate and it was just nonsense words?
Yeah.
What did you learn from this week's episode?
I learned to never stop trying.
Right, because they kept not being able to translate Murf, but then they finally figured it out?
Yeah.
Be persistent. Good job.
What's your first name and age?
My first name is Dietrich and my age is 6.
Did you like this episode?
Mm-hmm.
What was your favorite part?
Where Murf came into the water and grew his fins.
That was pretty cool. Did you like the way Murf looked?
Yeah.
Yeah. What did you learn from the episode?
That they had to stay together.
And that they're holding that kind of as the central tenet for everything? Yeah? Do you think they're going to do it? Do you think the kids are going to stay together?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.